You might be wondering why I'm wearing this wig and why I have pink fingers. Stay tuned. Maybe you're wondering why I'm wearing this crazy wig. Well, it's because I'm celebrating Sir Isaac Newton. No? You know, the guy who discovered gravity. Nothing? Wait, what if I told you he's the guy who had a lot to say about oobleck? All right, looks like I need to do some explaining. Number one, oobleck, it's awesome. It's this gooey substance that falls through your hands like liquid, but turns into a solid when you put pressure on it. In case you're wondering, that's not normal. Now, what does Sir Isaac Newton have to do with this puddingy stuff? It's not pudding. If you make it, don't eat it. It won't hurt you, but it'll taste nasty. Well, a long time ago, Sir Isaac Newton said that liquid flows at a consistent and predictable rate. Maybe someone else realized that before him, but he's the one who gets the credit. That basically means water will pretty much always behave like this when you pour it. It won't suddenly change its shape. And orange juice pretty much always behaves like this when you pour it. It's not going to suddenly pour out like ketchup. Those liquids are called Newtonian fluids. But oobleck is a non-Newtonian fluid. That means it doesn't act like water or orange juice. It changes depending on how much force is being applied to it. So if it's being squeezed or punched, it acts like a solid. And if the pressure is released, like when I hold it in my open hand, it kind of flows like a liquid. We're gonna show you how to make this later. But that's what makes oobleck so cool. That and it's really fun to say. Oobleck, 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 oobleck. Oobleck is so cool because it doesn't play by the rules, but that's how it's made. It's supposed to do things you don't expect. And that reminds me of Jesus. Hang on, I can explain why this reminds me of Jesus. Jesus often did the unexpected. He talked to people who were different than him, people who no one else would talk to. So while Jesus always obeyed God, he didn't always follow all of the extra rules that the religious leaders made. He did things that people thought shouldn't be allowed. He healed people on the Sabbath. He touched people who had a skin disease called leprosy. He paid attention to kids. Yeah, Jesus broke some rules, but even though he broke some of the rules that the religious leaders had, he always obeyed God. There's another incredible story in the Bible of someone who obeyed God no matter what. Check it out.
God's story, Daniel. So part of God's story is about a guy named Daniel, and it goes like this. Daniel was a Jew, which means he was part of God's special family. But when he was a young man, a king called Nebuchadnezzar, let's call him Nezer, came in from the city of Babylon and took over. He chose the smartest, strongest, most handsome Jewish men to leave their home and come work for him in his palace. One of those young men was Daniel. Even though most people in Babylon didn't follow God, Daniel and his friends did. So they had to figure out how to obey God and serve the king. For starters, they had to go through a training program where they were fed royal food. The problem was, King Nezer had also offered that food to idols or false gods. And since they followed God, they wanted nothing to do with idols. So, Daniel had an idea. He asked the chief of the king's staff if he and his friends could eat vegetables and water for 10 days instead. If they got too weak or skinny, they'd eat something else. Well, guess what? God made them even stronger than the men who ate royal food. God gave Daniel extra understanding, too. In fact, a few years later, the king had a nightmare. Nobody knew what it meant. Daniel told King Nezer that he would ask God to show him. God did. After that, King Nezer adored Daniel. He even said God was pretty great, which was a big deal, because the king didn't even think about God before that. But soon, he made it hard for Daniel to follow God again. That's because the king built a huge gold statue of himself, 90 feet tall. Anybody who didn't bow down to it would be thrown into a furnace. This time, Daniel's friends were the ones in trouble. Their names were Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They told the king, "The God whom we serve is able to save us. But even if he doesn't, we will never worship the gold statue you've set up." so they got sent into the fire. Well, pretty soon the king looked into the furnace and noticed that there were 4 men, and they were walking around. An angel of the Lord was protecting Daniel's friends. They got out alive and didn't even smell like smoke. God didn't stop them from getting punished, but he did go through it with them. The king had never seen a God who would rescue like that. Afterwards, King Nezer didn't mind if Daniel and his friends worshipped God, but the king still worshipped idols too. So God sent him another dream, and Daniel told him what it meant. King Nezer would live in a field and eat grass like a cow for 7 years. In other words, he'd go crazy until he realized that God is the only one we should worship. Kids, God doesn't want everybody to worship whoever they want. He wants everybody to worship him. Anyway, Daniel kept working for other kings of Babylon, even after King Nezer. God continued to help him understand dreams and visions. And even though he had to give a lot of bad news, Daniel did excellent work, and he was really well liked by the kings. In fact, one king named Darius liked Daniel so much that others got jealous. They tried to get Daniel in trouble. But they knew the only way to do that was to make a law against God. They suggested that everybody pray only to King Darius. That made the king feel important, so he made it a law. Anybody who disobeyed would spend the night in a den of lions. Daniel kept right on praying, though, and when King Darius found out, he was sad. He didn't want to punish Daniel, but now it was the law. He said, "May your God whom you serve faithfully rescue you." And guess what? God did! He sent an angel to shut the lions' mouths. Daniel served 4 important kings, and he followed God. But whenever it came down to obeying God or the king, Daniel chose God every time, no matter what. And even though Daniel had to do some really hard things, God was always with him. And that's the story of Daniel. So in case you missed it, here's the quick version. Daniel was taken to Babylon. He asked for vegetables. God made him strong. God gave Daniel understanding. Daniel's friends obeyed God instead of the king. They got punished. God rescued them. Daniel understood more dreams. He was the king's favorite. Others got jealous. Daniel obeyed God instead of the king. He got punished. God rescued him. Daniel served God no matter what. And that's a part of God's story.
So Daniel knew the rules of the kingdom, but he also knew that God's rules were different. And he chose to obey God, even if it meant being punished by the king. But this stuff doesn't just happen in the Bible. There are people all throughout history who've chosen to obey God, even when it meant breaking the rules, even when it meant there would be consequences. Nelson Mandela lived in a country called South Africa, and in this country, not that long ago, there was a rule called apartheid, which meant that people were kept separate based on their race and skin color. Nelson Mandela fought for people to be together, and he was put in prison for 27 years because of it. Eventually, he was released, and he became president of South Africa. Here's another example. Rosa Parks was riding a bus in Alabama, and the rules said that black people had to sit in the back of the bus. And if a white person wanted their seat, they had to give it up. But Rosa Parks refused. She was arrested, and a boycott of the bus system started in her city. So thousands of people refused to ride the buses until the rule changed. Eventually, it did. The city said that black and white people could both sit wherever they wanted on the bus. These people knew that if they broke the rules, they would get in trouble. They also knew that the rules were wrong. Now, this is tricky. How did they know that those rules were wrong? Because those rules weren't in line with what God says about people and how to treat them. God wants us to treat each other with kindness and respect. The rules that Rosa Parks and Nelson Mandela refused to obey gave one group of people less value or importance than another, simply because of the color of their skin. It's really clear that God does not think that way. Unfortunately, people still make rules that give some people more importance than others. If you ever think there's a rule that's making one person more valuable than another, that's a great time to talk to an adult you trust about what you're seeing and how to make it right. Check out these stories of people who courageously disobeyed.
There was a time I had to courageously disobey. There was this rule in downtown Cincinnati where I live that people who are homeless couldn't live in tent cities where all the tents would be together and people would live together. So there was a rule that you couldn't live in tent cities, and my wife and I felt like we needed to go help people who were homeless. And so we risked getting in trouble ourselves to go and take food and shoes and some other stuff to our friends who were homeless. And I'll tell you what, it was powerful to be able to hang out with them, have great conversations, and not worry about what the rule might have said, but rather try to do what God wanted us to do, and that was help our neighbors who were in need.
One time there was a rule that made a person's wishes and desires higher than what God's wishes and desires were, and I had to courageously disobey and say, nope, I can't follow you, I gotta follow God.
I remember back in elementary school, I had some friends who had an unwritten rule when it came to what was cool and what wasn't cool. Who you should hang out with, who you shouldn't hang out with, who you should talk to, who you shouldn't talk to. I remember there was one girl who was sitting by herself and didn't have anybody to talk to her, and I wanted to go and talk to her. And my friends discouraged it because she wasn't cool, or she wasn't seen as nice or friendly, and she was on the quieter side. And I knew that just because she was quiet doesn't mean that she's not cool, and that maybe people just hadn't tried to be friends with her. I courageously disobeyed my friends in that, and I went over and I talked to her. And the good thing is my friends didn't stop being my friend. I didn't lose any friends when I did that. If anything, I just gained a new friend. And so that encouraged me the next time I had the opportunity to reach out and talk to somebody that I didn't know before, I would do it.
We've talked about some important and serious stuff. That's a good thing. Sometimes you just need to have fun. One way you can do that is by making yourself some oobleck. If you want to, here's what you'll need. My friend Jen made some and tried some interesting twists. If you want to see more fun projects like this, like and subscribe.
Hey, do you want to make oobleck too? All right, let's do this. It's super simple. All you need is to get an adult to get you some cornstarch and some water. And the ratio is 2 to 1. 2 parts cornstarch, 1 part water. So in this bowl, I have some cornstarch, 2 cups of cornstarch, and then I'm gonna add some water. Add some food coloring if you would like. Just a couple drops. Mix it up. Add it to your water. Then you just mix, mix. Gets kind of slimy. Gets a little goopy. And if it feels a little liquidy like mine is right now, you can just add more cornstarch. Just add a little bit at a time. See what happens. Yeah, it's looking good. All right, I think it's ready. Let's see what this does. Now, if I put a lot of force on it, it doesn't do anything. But if I go slow, you can pick it up and roll it into a ball. You can add all kinds of fun things. You can add glitter. I like this kind. Mix it up. You can add Orbeez. Will they float? Will they sink? Ooh. I hope you had fun making oobleck today.